You got to make your own reservations when you travel.
Best I could do is I could call them up on the phone and they'll book it all for me. But it's just easier for a hotel because then I can get like exactly what I want.
Tell them, yeah. You know what though, man? I hate to like, this sounds so like bitchy and proper, but when you're working, client by client, and I know that you've been here, but you aren't here currently. I spend so much fucking time for shit like this and what I'm trying to do is save them money. And it's just like, stop. Why do I try so hard? And at the end of the day, there's so many times when it's like, do they even fucking care? Like, do they expect this to be this much? And I'm losing sleep because like, I'm kind of frugal naturally. And I'm going to do what I can do to not stay at a $300 a night hotel when I can get the same shitty double bed for $130. But that takes me an hour to do that. And that's an hour I could have spent actually like working on the file, not making reservations. I just bring it up because I remember a time in my life when it was like, literally you just forward an email to someone else and then they forwarded you back your flight, your hotel. You don't even have to deal with invoicing it. I'm speaking before I was my own boss.
I got some full service options. Wait, I got 2 comments. One, you should definitely not worry about that time. You should just book what you want. And I would say book the little bit nicer thing because generally like your client doesn't care. And you being comfortable for a couple days is way worth like $60 to $200 extra dollars.
I'd like to think so. I really would. The problem it comes when like they're like, well, this other engineer I hired stayed in his van for 3 days. I'm like, okay, well that's not appropriate. You can't expect that of everyone. I think I told you I had a file recently. I had to go over to Maui overnight. It was like a Days Inn or something. It was $320. It's the smallest room.
On your own dollar, bro. Was it on your own dollar or was it on their dollar?
It was on their dollar because I was just like, I looked. That was the cheapest room I could find.
Yeah, when it's like that type of situation, nice. I comply when it gets into real expensive rooms for sure. Even now, like my boss is really cool. And so I don't really, we talked about this a little bit. I think even one-on-one over our Marco Polo line that we always mention on the show. But like, I really, I'm not like balling out anyways. So like for the extra little suite room, which I often get, I just get it because it makes my yoga easier to do. And like, quite frankly, we don't even really like go out anymore. It's usually like we just order DoorDash. So when
that's
you're eating
definitely
food on your bed, man,
yeah,
it's too hard. I can't.
COVID destroy. If you were still someone who enjoyed the minor perks of travel, right? If you think work travel is great, it just means you haven't done it a lot. But that doesn't mean you can't find some enjoyment in it. And what I'm saying is that those slices of enjoyment, those are gone. Now it's just you're away from home and still expected to produce. I mean, that's always been the reality. But like I said, there used to at least be the facade of, well, I don't know, maybe I can go to a new restaurant. I'm out of town or something like that, And now it's just, nope. Not available.
Yeah. Well, some of that's COVID and some of that is probably like the type of work you do too, because like it's so involved all day. I know that like by the time I get back to a hotel room, and I guess, we're at the beginning of our second Greatest Hits episode. We should probably intro that, but people know that there's going to be clips, especially if they listen to the first one following. While we talk about work travel, which comes up a lot here. I think that like for me, number one, I have to have some kind of level of comfort. And because I do it so much, I know how to work the system a little bit, but also like if if the matter is that much between, and I've had to stay in some like shitty places because they weren't available, kind of like what you were talking about with Maui, not just because of the cost, like it's just, what's available.
Yeah,
I remember
that was it.
I was going back and forth in Nebraska a lot, and staying in some like cold ass motels and like cabins of owners, which I really enjoyed actually. Lake houses of like own stuff, but yeah. I stayed in some spots.
It's a little different. Yeah, dude. A shitty motel on your second or third night. You're like, what am I doing? I need to get home. I really need to get home.
Yeah. And so that extra room for me on that like third night, like if I have to do it, it's like helpful. And so
get you through that little bit of I know that's not comfort of home, but like you mentioned yoga, like you travel with your life, and that's why you travel and work well. People burn out when they don't, figure out a way to do that.
Yeah. I think maybe the way that I kind of figure out how to do it, and maybe this is a pivot into our first clip here, is that like, I try to like, I have a context to my life when I go out of town so that I don't get like too much out of my habits. And so like we're talking about it being like, that little extra space in a hotel room or whatever for a couple extra dollars on an expense report. But, we had that opportunity to have Anna on a while back, my wife, for our listeners who don't know, just her by her first name. And I think that like, one of the things, and we spent a lot of time traveling together over the years when we had the consulting business on our own. And so one of the things that like we always built together was like trying to like figure out this like little establishment in a hotel space. And so it's gone through this kit through the years. And I know you're going to laugh when I say this, but like, sometimes it's included like a candle that would come along to like light, or like, it's like a note to each other kind of thing. And it always includes like yoga to some regard. Cause like you're really captive and like you don't have an opportunity to move around when you're staying in a hotel room. Like no matter what you do in your daily activity, it's going to be, at least in my types of travel and work that I do, it's going to be truncated.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I feel like I know your wife pretty well. I've known Anna for a couple, well, maybe not a couple decades, but it's been a minute.
It's getting there.
It was so amazing having Anna on, because I got to admit, I was taken aback at how open and just, I don't want to say heavy, but that was a very personal conversation, I thought, amongst friends, and because that's what it was, right? It's me, you, Skrilla, and Anna. And her and Chris have a relationship from college. You and her, obviously, and me through you. I know Anna. She shared what I thought so many people were thinking. What I think just an immeasurable amount of people are going through. And to open up and share like she did, I just thought it was, it just felt so important. It felt valuable.
Yeah. This clip is about like filtering that like vulnerability, I think, a little bit. Because we started talking about social media, and it started with one of our like jovial conversations where you and I like poke at social media, I think. And it kind of transpired into like the way that we communicate with our friends, which was something that, I've never like talked to Anna one-on-one about that. And we get a little bit of that in the show where we get to like kind of have these like deeper conversations. And it just so happens that it was my spouse. So that was kind of cool. But when we talked about, the way that we both try not to lose friends or shape the way that we think so much about the things that we think about people when we see on what they say on social media, or like how we like kind of reach out a little bit. I think when we're in need was implied. And so it's one of those rare episodes where there's four of us, which, it takes a little bit of production mastery. In the most part, it takes each of the people who are on the show with four people to not interrupt each other. And I think we all did a good job of that in this clip. I hope you guys enjoy it too.
I remember remember a point in college where someone asking me about friends, quantifying, like they were asking, and this happened regularly, where people would ask you how many friends you had on Facebook. Do you remember when that was like a thing? Like that was a goal, was to up your friend numbers. Like
I think that's still a thing, Mike.
I mean, I know that's still a thing.
You just don't care now.
Well, for me, I don't mind when it goes down. It's a little bit, makes life a little bit easier. I know what I'm up to, man. If those numbers grow, that's not a good thing. I don't need new friends other than Skrilla. That's the newest friend I made in the past like 5 years. It's been really fruitful. I've enjoyed that.
You talk about real friends.
Real friends. Yeah, real friends.
Real friends.
There is that difference. And I guess you did this at one point in time too. You disconnected and broke away from Facebook. There is that part that like when you make those friends at a party in college, or like you had a class with them one time and now it's 11 years later and you're reading about like what they thought they might vote about because they wanted to, let the world know what their thought was. It turns into being this like a little bit different thing, because a lot of times you didn't really know them, right? I mean, we've got to know each other through that Marco Polo app. I guess Marco Polo keeps coming up, but Skrilla and Mike and I have really, spent a lot of time bonded through that app, and that's a way different type of environment than MySpace. You just try to send MySpace messages like some girls you wanted to meet, or like, like some person that you met one time and you try to connect with them or something.
Well, one of the things,
I think people want something deeper.
One of the things, I mean, I think we've probably all gained to appreciate this over the past few months, is how different communication is when it's associated with not just a voice, but also facial expression and, visually seeing the person you're talking to. I don't know about for you guys, man, but the first time I think Skype introduced that concept to me, right? Where it's like a phone call, you get to see the person you're talking to. And from the very first time I did it, it was such a tangible difference from the phone conversations I had had with that exact same person in, very recently. Because for me personally, I just need that. I don't need it, but I definitely thrive and kind of depend off like, hey man, are you hearing what I'm saying? And like you get that by looking at someone's eyes and looking at their facial expressions. And the computer, or just the text, is the furthest removed from that. You know what I mean? So it's not surprising that those relationships tend to like linger, whether they should or shouldn't. You know what I mean? They just kind of stay on the back burner, or they hang around for longer than they should because you met somebody when you were 20.
Yeah, that's true. And I think, there's kind of like an art to choosing like your mode of communication, like knowing what should be a text message versus like a phone call. Like there's like nuance in that.
Do you all like have phone conversations anymore? Like, does anybody have actual phone conversations?
Yes, but like, it's not necessarily my favorite like mode of communication always. Like that's not my like I like the occasional really long phone call. And so sometimes like having just one of those like really nice long conversations with somebody is like nice. And
like who do you talk on the phone with, Anna?
Like I'm thinking non-family. Like family.
Like non-family. Yeah. I have a few friends that are like phone call people that like every once in a while it's like a 1 to 2 hour long phone call where like you just sort of like you just spend the time. Sometimes it's organic, sometimes I know that if I like haven't talked to somebody in a long time,
you kind of got
a longer phone call.
It's in the calendar a little bit more. No, that makes sense. I mean, that's funny you said that, Chris, because I'm like, what? My mom, my dad, my sisters, like, but outside of family, those phone calls, I don't do them as much as I should. But at the same time, I'm like Anna, I don't do them because it's just not my preferred mode of communication. But maybe, I don't know if that's a cop out. I think some of my friends might say that's a cop out.
What about you, Ryan?
I'm big phone call.
Oh, you big phone guy, huh?
I probably talk to one friend a day, at least on the phone.
You don't got that many friends. Who you kidding, bro?
Well, it's
You're
a small
just scrolling
cycle.
through Facebook.
small cycle.
It's a bi-weekly cycle. No, I'm just kidding,
it might
Ryan.
be. Maybe I get into the third week, but no, I do. It's not like it has been systematic in my life. I work on lists, but like on my list for the week when I sit down, I will have somebody that I haven't spoken to in 6 months every single week.
It's true. As long as I've known Ryan, which is a while now.
Who are you? I mean, so are you having like 10-minute conversations with people you haven't talked to in 6 months? Because if so, like that's a skill, and I would like you to tell me how that's possible.
Yeah, sometimes, everybody has a different like length and call time, I think, but
call tolerance.
Yeah. So, in most cases, it's a 10 to 15 minute conversation, even if we haven't spoken in quite some time. It started when I was on the road so much, week after week after week. I just,
that makes
maybe
sense.
It didn't start there. I've always done it, but like being more formal about it and like writing it on my daily task list, it's an important part. And so, who I call, I have like the family cycle, which are some friends and family for me, like when you talk about bullet. But I also, I really do look through my contacts. And, if I have a call that ends early, if I have a space in my day, I usually try to do it before noon and I just call. Sometimes I'm happier to get voicemail.
I was going to ask you, do you leave voicemails?
Never once.
Oh, so
I
you
bet I
can
haven't left a voicemail in
them.
5 years. Yeah.
See, we are such different animals.
What about
y'all? If you leave me one,
voicemails?
I don't listen to it.
Well, I got to talk to clients all the time. Well, I wish it was all the time, but the reality is it doesn't happen as often as I'd like. But when I do talk to clients, it's almost always by phone. And a lot of times my clients aren't eager to jump at the phone. So I get sent to voicemail regularly. I don't take it personal, whatever, they're in meetings. But like, I'm not trying to sit around and wait for them to call back. If I've been working on an investigation for 6 months and I got some findings and they're not available when they said they were going to be available, I'll drop you guys see how I talk on Marco Polo. I'll drop a 5-minute voicemail without hesitation. But dude, for me, listen, and I need to be clear about this. It's God. Well, that work mic is not this mic. It's a version of this mic, but it's not the same guy. So for me, it's like I'll leave you guys one of these one day where I'll just like pretend you're a client and I'll leave you a voicemail and you'll be like, you sound like a fucking robot, man. I'm like, yeah, no, that's what they call me for. I need to be the robot.
It's almost like a deposition then for you, right? Like
exactly. I'm not telling them how I'm doing and like asking them about the weather and shit. I'm like, hey, this is who this is. This is the case I'm calling to talk to you about. And boom, here it is. Call me if you have any questions. So but a lot of times I just get an email back and they're like, sounds good, man. Go ahead with the report.
So context is everything for that. Like when you decide, like what, because that's in a business setting, you're really like, that's a transfer of information. In that case, like that voicemail is probably a computer file now, which is in a database, which is now on record. And that's the goal, right? So
well, for me, exactly.
It's an efficiency thing in that case. If you're leaving 5-minute voicemails for like your friends,
I wouldn't have any callbacks.
It's not the right. It's not the right mode. I mean, like maybe in some cases, but like I think so much of it is thinking about who the individual is who is receiving the message. Like who are you specifically talking to, and like how do they want to receive a message?
So we had the Sausage King on. Oh man, I think that was the last episode of 2020. And our friend Will Branch came on, and I just laughed because I think at the beginning of the episode there were a couple puns, and he makes a couple jokes about how
he was well versed.
He's well versed in the jokes, but Will has created a company called Corridor Sausage, and I guess like a lot of our guests, we get him to give a little bit more about why he got into what he's done. And I think I'm pretty proud of the interview. You know, it's harder, and we've talked about it's harder to interview friends sometimes.
This dude blew my mind. And like, for the record, going into this, I thought he was just some dude who like started a company. You know, one of the first things we find out is he went to school for journalism. Right away, I'm like, oh shit, he knows how bad we are at this. What I really took from Will was, I think there was multiple points in the show where I had to be like, dude, you are too humble. You're acting like you make food for, you know, Super Bowl parties. Dude, you are corridors. You and your partner are corridor sausage. Yeah. You started from nothing. You started from like you would imagine, couple dudes working, you know, maybe renting out a corner of a butcher shop and probably doing it, like I said, for like Super Bowl parties, for buddies, for whatever, catering. Go to Trader Joe's today. Go to the best supermarket you can find. But we talked about so much more than sausage. So I really, this guy is amazing. He's just he happens to be making sausage at the moment.
Yeah, well, I think he's not on to, I won't say different things, but they sold their company, right? And so he shares a lot about like what happens when a company gets sold.
A merger. The big M word comes up in this one, and I couldn't have asked for a better person to kind of walk us through it. Because as you pointed out, really right when the first time he said that word is like a lot of interpretations, means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But Here we were talking with somebody who not only went through an enormous, pretty enormous merger, he went through it during COVID. And he had this like wonderful perspective. I mean, I'm not saying it was all positive and, there aren't any stumbles in the road, but he was just, he was really open. I know I've said that already about Will, but I really enjoyed that conversation.
Yeah, it was cool of him to come on. We have to get him back. That's something we talk about a lot. Perhaps part of these clips episodes will inspire some of our folks to remember how much fun they had on the show. I know he had a lot of fun. We put a pretty big dent in the classic bottle of whiskey, which seems to come out when our guests come aboard. But we'll get him back. Until then, here we go. We got Will Branch, Artisan Chef.
Check him out. It's really special, and usually, I'll be honest, man, I don't know how many of us put ourselves in these places, but it's easy to recognize in hindsight when you were in a very competitive but collaborative environment, and how productive, and just like, I'm not in that space anymore. You know what I mean? But I used to work at a company and I had that around me, and like that's, it's hard to recreate that, and I appreciate you kind of like longing for that. I definitely get that experience, but there's a time and a place, right? Like there's a point in your life. I read up a little bit on Zach's background, and I understood like the honing in on like the charcuterie and things like that. And you mentioned growing up, that interest and the fondness of the butchers and the sausage accent in your household, though. And you mentioned your mom is Chinese, or?
Yes.
Okay. Had you ever seen sausage made before you were like in school making it yourself? I mean, other than at the butcher shop.
No.
That's a good question.
No.
Okay. Yeah.
No, I hadn't. It was one of those weird things of like, I really hadn't. I was like, but I could like watch, be like, I think I'd be good at that. Like, you start looking at it, like, I think I'd be okay there.
Well, did you have that foundation? Because I recall that time in Detroit, around Metro Detroit too, and we're from different parts of the city. So, like for our listeners, I think it's like Will would be more north, Mike would be more west, and I would be more south. But there still was a world of intermingled ethnic butcher shops.
Yes.
Right? It was not like, a grocery store is a grocery store is a grocery store today, but the brands that exist in the grocery store almost were as numerous as the butcher shops that existed.
Yes.
Right. And that had to have been able to flavor some of what you were doing, even if you were making it at home. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, you go to a friend's house and it's pierogies and kielbasa, or, and I'm just thinking about like fresh created Italian sausage.
My mouth is watering thinking about that.
Yeah. And now that stuff is behind a glass counter in a different way. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And everything in the sausage world when we started become commodity. It was this world of like where you're gonna try to be $2.59 a pound and in 1 million stores across the country. And those were the brands that were ubiquitous across all stores. Sure. So we came in and we said, no one is approaching this from an artisan value. Like no one is coming in and saying like, we want to use pasture-raised pigs. We want to use antibiotic-free meats. And so we just came and said, like, here's how we want to eat. Here's how we want to feed our family. We want fresh ingredients and not things that have sat in a bag for months and had no flavor and just impart a cardboardy sausage. And it was interesting. Even like the field has changed a lot. Like there are more artisan brands out there now. We found ourselves like being the small guy punching up that were pretty unique to companies coming out of Chicago that had big VC funding that were basically marketing firms coming out of another factory. And it was interesting how quickly in just a very short period of time things pivoted. But, you know, we try to stay scrappy and nimble and just do the best product we could.
We spoke with Susan Tomasi well over a year ago at this. Well, maybe not well over a year ago. Like I think it was also part of our, Atlanta cohort. Susan is a professor of linguistics at Emory University, pedagogy and linguistics. My apologies. And we kind of got into what those big words mean in the show. One of them means the study of teaching, and the other is ultimately the study of language. So I'll be honest, I grew up in a family of teachers, and I have a lot of love and passion and enthusiasm for, pedagogy. But the linguistics part is such a niche, little curiosity of mine. All my years, all my traveling, anywhere I've ever gone, I've always been fascinated with accents and dialects and the nuances, and to actually have the opportunity to speak with someone who shared my curiosity, but could answer my questions. And like not just intellectually, but, she appreciated that like some of my questions were a bit odd. And she was so patient and so understanding. And I mean, what we're talking about is a potentially sensitive thing. I personally don't have a lot of sensitivities to people's feelings about my voice, but other people may. And Susan was so awesome. If you've ever had any curiosity or interest or even just fallen in love with the way somebody's voice sounds, you got to hear us talk to this linguistics professor. It was a blast.
It's great. Susan's one of my better friends. So I think anything that I would say to follow your really cool explanation of meeting Susan would be it would be shortcoming. So like I was excited to introduce you to Susan as a person. And part of what we get to do here is I get to introduce you to some of my friends, and we get to learn about their lives without, like, let's say, mixing in all the dinners ahead of time.
Yeah. It is. It's a really cool way to get to know somebody. Because if you go to a dinner party and sit down and talk to somebody's wife for an hour and a half, at some point it's probably going to be, awkward. With that said, though, like Susan's interview, like it was so touching and like impactful to me. I don't know if you remember this, Ryan, but like 2 months after her interview, I was in Maui. And at that point, Maui had just opened up travel inter-island. In other words, we were still right in the midst of, kind of not early COVID, we'll call it mid-COVID. And Nicole and I had gone over there for a work trip, and I, made a couple extra days about it. And Maui had COVID signs that were very unique. And in that way, I mean, the state of Maui recognized that, maybe just sharing the CDC templated COVID, expectations with the local Maui residents wasn't maybe it wasn't going to be as effective as, you know what? Let's talk to them how we talk. And that will be the best way to communicate with our people. I got like 15 of the posters. I sent Susan a copy just because I was like, Susan, we talked about this, the importance of a nurse being able to speak in a local dialect to a local patient, and how much more effective, that communication is than possibly the physician who's not as interested or possibly as, close to the source as is sometimes necessary to really get through. So,
sure. I don't know. I was just proud to have her aboard. I think to one thing you said, and this is just a blatant plea that I should probably follow up with a text, but if you sat next to Jamie and Susie at a dinner party, you would be so enthralled with them as a couple and like how cool they are as a couple that you might not get the chance to know much more about her as a linguist. And so like it was really cool that she shared all that with us. So here we go.
Hell yeah.
I think it's Susan. It's Dr. It's definitely Doctor. Let's make sure we introduce her correctly. It is Dr. Susan Tomasi with Communicative Opportunity.
New York, New Jersey, and the Southeast are 3 areas in the United States that have pretty heavily stigmatized dialects, ways of speaking, that are talked about pretty openly in the media. Growing up, I thought, okay, well, I mean, I'm Southern and I have some parts of my speech that are Southern, but I don't sound like those people over there. Those are the real Southern people. So there's definitely a stigma that's really well known. So it wasn't that like my family in New Jersey necessarily thought that they had the best speech, but they didn't necessarily think it was that bad. And my family in Georgia, same thing. Or they're like, there are people that are worse. And I understand the perceptions of that some people think it's bad. But this is my people. This is who I am.
Yeah, I mean that's mom's cooking, right? Like
it's almost
that's what it tastes like.
Typecast, right? And so I guess not only is it supported by media in a lot of like sitcom media, but there's also like experiences from that perspective. So having lived and worked in the Southeast and then coming from Michigan, and it's funny, I want to come back to this because we were actually taught that we talk normal. I mean, Mike, I don't know if you remember this or not, but like I remember being taught that the Midwest accent is the accent
was more
that everybody,
like neutral. Yeah. Like maybe not good or bad, but just not on any side.
Right.
If you look at it as
part
a
of like
spectrum.
elementary education, like part of elementary education, we taught that, right?
For us, yeah.
There certainly is a component with which, well, I guess that contributes to your statement, right, Susan? But like, being so confident in it or overconfident in it. But there certainly is in the Southeast or in the Northeast, and this is kind of a question, like, you really can diagnose where somebody is from, I think, a little bit easier than you can, let's just say, west of the Mississippi. I don't want to be so bold as to say, why is that, right? Because that could, I'm sure, be a huge answer. But could you give us some indicators on like how that ends up happening?
Can we just include, of those 5 cities you mentioned earlier, can we include Boston in there? Boston isn't one of those major,
Northeast.
Northeast.
So there are a couple of things to talk about. So the way that language works is language is always changing and transforming, and it always works to meet the needs of its speakers. And as one of the things that happens all the time is, there are very few universals about language. The universal is that language always changes. And now what happens is language will always change at different times in different places and among different groups of people. So why do people in England sound differently than people in the United States? Because people picked up and they moved over and they planted here. And then these 2 sets of people change differently over time. And so now we have 2 different ways of speaking.
Variables.
Yes. And so as people come together and split apart, their language continues to change. And so the people that split might sound like them for a little while, but then they'll start to sound a little bit different. So every place in the United States has to some extent, and it depends on how closely you want to look or where you want to divide the lines. Everywhere has its own accent. Everywhere has its own dialect. And I mean, in my class, I draw lots of maps and have, people moving across the country and saying that what happened was on the East Coast of the United States. So the places that were settled by English speakers earliest. These are the areas: Boston, New York, Charleston, New England, Savannah, Richmond. These are all the places that had their language set before the American Revolution. It's changed over time, but like that was in place. Now what happened is, as those people moved west, this is my moving west. As people moved west, they all started to interact with one another. So on the West Coast, 50, 60 years ago, everybody kind of sounded a lot alike compared to the people on the East Coast, which still had those pretty distinct differences. Now, what's happening is in the last 20, 30 years, we're watching as the West Coast is changing as well. Northern California sounds different from Southern California. The Pacific Northwest sounds different than California. Okay. And one of the most interesting things that's going on right now that we've been able to track for the last 50 years is there's a shift in how people are speaking along the northern part of the U.S., and it's happening just in cities. It's happening in Detroit. It's happening in Milwaukee. It's happening in Buffalo, in Minneapolis, St. Paul, Chicago. And so those areas that used to be considered just like the common standard American speech, actually people speak more differently now there versus the rest of the country than they ever did. So now that's an area where I can actually pick out somebody from Michigan a lot easier than I can pick out somebody from most places in the United States anymore.
Man, I could speculate all over that. I wonder how much digital communication, and therefore, so like if I communicate digitally all day, do I become more nucleic in the way that my localized accents affect me? If that makes sense, right? I don't know. That's
That's a cool subject, man.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but
so there are two sides. So people always say, well, I mean, and this happened with radio, it happened with TV, it happened with the internet. Oh, with X technology, people are going to start sounding more alike. What happens is that doesn't happen. What it does happen is you understand more people because you're used to hearing them. Like a standard British dialect, we have no problem hearing now because we hear it all the time. You're interacting with more people. You're hearing more people than you would have never heard before. It's not necessarily changing your speech a whole lot because it's still only a small part of what's going on. And you don't interact with the radio or TV. You kind of have to have that interaction for it to affect you. So people would always say like, oh, the United States, everybody's going to start speaking the same. We're actually speaking differently from one another. But these types of communication systems does allow us to have influence from people that we wouldn't expect or that we wouldn't have had before.
I just have so many.
I'm going to answer one of the earlier questions that you guys had. The reason you were taught that you had like the standard best way of speaking was when we decided to create a media standard when TV and radio were happening, 30s, 40s, 50s. They went to the Midwest and wrote down what people sounded like and said this. And actually, you can still find that booklet. It's the NBC standard. Okay. National Broadcasting
System. Talk like people from the Midwest. It's so Midwest people found that out and we're good at something. Yeah. And we're going to make sure everyone knows it. Right?
Because it was democratically American. The East Coast, nobody knew what was going on the West Coast. The East Coast had too much kind of reminiscence of previous times.
So I just moved recently, but we're not talking about that. A couple months back, Ryan moved back home. We talk about the logistics of moving a little bit. But you know us, we talk a lot more about like the emotional components of life and of the obstacles. And I know not everyone associates like self-care and grooming with emotion, but I think you'll hear in this clip the value. Maybe not all men or women take in that, kind of grooming, but some take extreme joy and pleasure in things like finding a barber, which Ryan shares with us in this clip.
That was so eloquent. So eloquent. I don't even know if I need to put anything in to add in there. As always, pleasure to have Chris on the show. And it gets like, those are some pretty personal things. We talk about grooming, it turns out, a little bit on the show. And style comes up a lot. So I guess like I'm sure that neither of us think or probably look at ourselves as like well-groomed or stylish men.
No one looks at us like that. I can assure you no one else looks at us like that. My favorite part of this clip, and hang in there for it, is towards the end. You guys got to remember, this had occurred. We filmed this shortly after Ryan had just gotten a haircut. He came fresh. Chris knew the ethnicity of the person who had cut Ryan's hair. That's how into and educated Chris is on the world of grooming and self-care. So stay tuned. Check this one out.
Talking about comforts, one of the comforts that I have is just like getting a haircut every week. Because like grooming is very important to me. You have a relationship. It's almost like a relationship. I mean, not a relationship, a marriage with your barber. For sure. And I'm curious, Ryan, like, what did you do when you moved down there? How did you find a barber?
So, oh man, it's funny you mentioned that. This is one of my most difficult things is finding a barber. So I'm on like a 3-week schedule. I am very religious about hair grooming, so on and so forth.
As you should.
And as I should, right? I know we got a future episode coming up about some of the things that, like, as a grown ass male, not to be gender specific, that you should be, and one of them is attentive to your hair grooming. So, long and the short of it is, this is where I started to learn. Just to be quite frank with you, it's kind of funny you brought that up because we didn't really rehearse any of this, but that was where I started to learn about the South because. I don't know. I would say like most of my life, I have gone to a barber shop for white dude's hair that functions like a black dude's barbershop. Okay. And I'm not trying to predispose. This is not some kind of race conversation. This is just like, for those who know, you click back into some of our other episodes, but like, for me, I enjoy the network and the conversation, and I'm not so poignant about having to be able to have like an appointment, right? But what I found down south is, number one, for that type of barbershop, at least where I was, especially where I was, it was more of a like, I mean, it was just like, I don't know how to say this, man. Like I experienced some race things, like commentary type, like southern shit, which is very evident and very live. But the other thing that I always had such a hard time with is that, like, I usually like a dude to cut my hair, right? And so for most cases throughout my life, it's been, I think, honestly, like a gay dude, for most cases. Like, not just because I like seek out some gay guy to cut my hair or anything, but like that seems to work how I work, right? And so I bet I went through 10 barbershops before I found this place in Atlanta that I was at for about 5 years. Through all of those houses is a place called the Trophy Room. Rolando, the owner of the Trophy Room, has agreed to come on the show. We'll get him on here someday. But yeah, it's tough, man. And you know what? I'm in the same dang situation again, Chris. Now, I don't know where to go.
Do you have, like, because I mean, our viewers can't see your hair, but do you have a white barber, black barber, Hispanic barber? Like, what is the makeup, the demographic of some of the shops you've been at?
It's usually one of those three things: white gay dude, some sort of Hispanic male, or a black male. That's like just been what it is.
Around, like you've been around. You've tried to.
Yeah, well, I'm real loyal to it too, right? So like even like this, when COVID came through, I helped support some of the barbers at my place, like the guys that didn't even cut my hair, just because like it's a big important relationship for me.
The last
always has been.
The last person that cut your hair, black or white or Hispanic?
That's Rolando, Trophy Room, Hispanic dude.
Yeah, I can tell, man. Yeah.
We chatted with Chris Hoogerhide a couple months ago. Chris he's an extension of my family. To get a little personal, he's my older brother who has also been on the show. He's my older brother's sponsor. That's at least how they initially met. And as you can imagine, he holds a very, 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 very dear place in mine and my family's heart. But on top of that, Chris is just awesome. I know he holds a huge place in a lot of people's hearts. And we really delved into his show was very heavily focused on sobriety, his journey with sobriety, his existence in sobriety. We talked a lot about AA, the program, and various aspects of it. But what I was super almost weirdly curious about how COVID had affected AA, how COVID had potentially eliminated, some of these support groups, or at least affected them in ways that, me as not a, ongoing member of any sort of program, I'm oblivious to. So this is just I thought a great clip, a great example of us being able to talk to some real experts about things we're really curious about. And I think we should all be curious about this stuff. This is society.
I agree. I think one of the things, and I've gotten to know Chris a little bit after the episode, but I think one of the things that Chris always reminds me of, and this is something that I don't think a lot of people are really honest about, is that like it's important to save space for your friends that are sober, because it's not just about, like, most people I really think approach it with like a really soft touch, that they need to like not have alcohol around or not share things that are happening to them in their lives if they use other substances or however
fragility.
That works.
Yeah, there's a fragileness that they're kind of treated with constantly.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that I've come to know is that like when people stop sharing their vulnerability with somebody when they're going through and continue to work through being sober, which Chris is so candid about, that it starts to like cut off those relationships in a weird way, whether they want to or not. And so like, this is like a really empowering story. I think here we just have a slice where, he kind of talks a little bit about how to be remotely connected with his group and being, kind of specific about how to get involved with a group if you think you need help. And so he makes it really easy. And so I thought this was a really cool slice to share with our people.
Are all AA meetings, like, have they been suspended, or they all shift into this virtual? Sorry to take us on such a segue here, but I'm curious about the technical challenges that these meetings have faced since this all went down. Because I immediately am like, dude, you just told people to stay home from work. You just gave them a bunch of money, and there's no more public gatherings. The first thing I thought of is like, holy shit, a bunch of people are going to be ODing, and a bunch of people are going to be falling back into their vices. Like,
yeah,
that was my first thought, which is really weird.
They have what's called Alano clubs, and they're basically like a place that gets, that rents to AA meetings. So like you kind of rent a room, and the charge is like $1 a person or something like that is what's suggested. And basically they have several meetings. Ann Arbor's got a lot of great ones, Ann Arbor, Michigan. And so they've got a lot of meetings at this Alano Club. So the place had to close down because they couldn't have more than 10 people in a venue. So they closed down for a while. And, you know, at first it was like kind of exciting to some of us that have been around a long time because, like, you know, what do? Like, we gather in secret, you know, like, and it would be like you know, like, or like me, your brother, a couple of other cool friends that we want to like.
The show must go on though. Like, there was no like.
So we just kind of gather in a room. But then it was like, all right, we had to acknowledge, like, there's no new people here. You know, we all know how each other's lives are going. We all know what each other are going through. And we started to really realize, like, there are no new people here. And like, they had like the detox center, but those, they're not letting anybody in there unless they're there for help. So it did end up, they had finally opened that place back up, but we go there and it's not the same. You know, it's definitely had its effects. That's changed everything. It's these people that had like sort of minimum wage jobs, that these places closed down, all of a sudden they're out on their ass. Like, people that were trying and sort of succeeding in getting sober, now life is back in the gutter because they can't make a living.
And that, like, not to be so like dismal, but I seriously, like, that's why you are an expert at this topic. And the reality is like, none of us are an expert at dealing with anything in coronavirus. So I'm just curious, like have you had like firsthand experiences where people were like, man, I lost my network. Like, my network's gone, and that's not my excuse, but like, where you've had to be like, don't give me that shit. Like, I mean, how have you responded to that?
Yeah, I mean, there's people that like the phone calls have really picked up, because there's some people that are like, I don't have a smartphone. You know, there's still people out there that don't have, you know, iPhones.
Well, that's why I say the expectation that everyone's got like a laptop, and I'm like, dude, we're talking about a demographic here where they've been doing hard drugs for who knows how long. So a lot of this stuff have been recent developments. So give a 50-year-old, 20-year junkie a laptop and tell him to log into that meeting. He's like, what is this thing? You know?
So what it's turned into is us giving phone numbers, like phone lists, just like old school AAs, like, call this guy. And like, you know, when you're new, you have this like, what do I have to say to this person? Like, I don't know this person. It's cold calling just to say I need help. Like, it's really, really difficult. So one thing that I've always told people is like, tell them you just need to talk to somebody and your sponsor's making you do it, so you're doing it. And you don't have to sound like, don't fake it. Just like, let them know, like, hey, this is really weird. My sponsor's making me call people. How you doing? You know, and luckily there's guys out there.
That's amazing though.
Yeah, so like, I'll be like, call Dan Sinnott, tell him that your sponsor's telling you to call him, ask him about this. And, you know, luckily he kind of knows. He knows the deal. So he'll take the ball, run with it, make this guy feel a little bit less awkward, you know, and give him a chance to just kind of like have that little time where like he knows he's not being judged for being new, and he knows that like not everybody's looking at him like he's a piece of shit, because like we've all been pieces of shit. So like don't even kind of dwell on that. Just like right now, like, you got a new friend. What are you doing tomorrow? You know, here's some things that you should do. And like, you get those suggestions, and then, you know, most of the time those people will be like, call me in a couple days. And then you call in a couple days. So you're sort of like, I mean, there's been people that I sponsor have been sponsoring for 2 months that they've never met in person.
Since this started, basically.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Which normally would never have been the case. You know, you meet in a meeting, you know, call me, we'll meet here next week, or we'll meet at this meeting on Wednesday. And then, you know, you would go and you'd meet like an hour before, you'd kind of read the AA book, or like kind of go through somebody's like, you know, the steps with them, and kind of let them know, like, here's what I need you to do if you want to have a good result and you want this to work. Yeah. But now it's kind of like all been done over the phone. And some of these guys, like, luckily, AA it's informal, it's not professional, but it has like these like intergroups that have like special like if somebody's like on the other end of the phone line. So there's these like AA hotlines, and somebody can be like, hey, I don't know what to do, I need help. There's a phone list that intergroup has. They'll be like, all right, hey, I'm gonna give somebody your phone number, they're gonna be calling you, and then they'll call us and be like, hey, this is Joe the drunk, he needs a phone call.
I need you to be my kind of eyes or my hands on deck. Like you're in that. Is it kind of regional, or would they
every there's several of them in Michigan and every state really. Like, so you'll have like a town and every kind of like little, like think of it like counties will have like an area intergroup, and then they'll have kind of the overarching statewide thing. And then, the World Service headquarters is in New York. So it's kind of like the place that prints the books. So like that was one of my things. Like when I got sober, it was like, sure, we all put a dollar in the basket. Where's this money going? And it goes to buy coffee.
No, that's fair.
And books and pay the club. And then ultimately, if there's a surplus, it goes to the New York office to kind of like keep printing the books and keep kind of holding these kind of area group meetings and kind of to keep the sort of administrative side of it going so that we can be available for things like those hotlines and stuff like that.
So this one comes from like a really cool show from one of those people who approach us to come on to Convention Not. And I guess this isn't one of the promos that cuts in, but we're always looking for people to come on the show. And we really appreciated getting to know Jason. This is Jason Goggins, and his episode's called Arresting Development. And here he talks to us about police training. And he was talking to us about police training in a time when things were more than hot around the country. And I think that hopefully, when you're listening to this, we're still focusing on the way that we're reforming the ideas of what and how policing happens in America. I think you have to listen to the whole episode, Mike, to get like the real piece of what happens in his career.
Oh, I absolutely agree. But, just the not even the cliff notes, but just to hear this man talk about these subjects during the times that we were talking about them, and to hear how eloquent and composed he was in what would be almost a naturally defensive conversation. As Ryan mentioned, this interview, I don't want to date it, but I would say weeks following the George Floyd murder. So speaking to a former police officer, speaking about police training, we definitely knew we were stepping into hot water here. And I have to give more credit to Jason than ourselves for his ability to handle that conversation, to answer our questions calmly, patiently, not defensively, experientially, and powerfully. So check this one out. Jason Goggins, Arrested Development.
Almost every career has an issue with people who exploit their power, right? So if I'm a target manager, and I'm not drawing loose, like joking parallels here, but if like I'm a target manager and it's probably a commensurate pay, right? Again, officers coming out of the academy do not make any money at all. It's like a teacher. Yep. And so like I want to use my power. I might use that on another employee or on a customer unfairly by cursing them out, or even like committing a striking crime on them. For some reason, right? Yeah. But it's just a different situation that way. And it's really an unfair expectation, right? Like it's an unfair expectation at 9 weeks and 36 weeks. Again, this is not my area of expertise, so I don't want any of our listeners to take it as my type of speculation about that. But like your mistake is potentially more costly, right? Yeah. And that mistake is just like one moment of one night of 1 year of one career. Yeah. And that is like really something that I wish we could start to solve for, because that's what everybody jumps behind, right? Like everybody jumps behind that. And
I think too is there's so many layers to this as well. I think that there's only so much training you can get to account for split-second decisions, and that's the big thing.
It's still human.
Yeah, it is, and that's something that when they train. First of all, they pound liability into your head in the academy. Don't do this, don't do this. You're going to get sued. So you're already on edge a little bit. But secondly, they also pound in your head. Go home at night. Well, if I got a guy under control and I've got a knee in the back of his neck, that's different. That's pathetic, piss poor police work, and it's criminal, and that person's going to pay for that. But I got a guy who I say, show me your hands. He doesn't show me his hands. Then I say, show me your hands again. And he very quickly reaches for a pocket and pulls out something black at night.
Yeah.
And I shoot, and turns out it was his wallet. Well,
You're
the media,
human.
Yeah, the media,
human.
Yeah, the media says, well, all he had was a wallet. Okay, yeah, but you know, I've got to go home to see my wife and kids. And why the heck didn't you just show me your hands? And why'd you make a quick movement towards your pocket? I mean, that's the layers to it. So I don't know how much you can train that away, split second decisions. But at the same time, you know, 9 weeks, and talking about layers to this, you know, 9 weeks is not enough. There's an argument to be made that 35 weeks is not enough. But then it becomes about funding. And now the police departments don't have the money to train you beyond that. So it's a messy situation.
I was going to say, I don't think anyone out there is like, yeah, let's just send them out. Like, it's 9 weeks for a reason, right? At the end of the day, this all comes down to 36 weeks costs a lot more money.
A lot more money,
That money ain't coming from donors. It's not coming from, you know, philanthropists. It's coming from taxes, right? Like, that's where it's coming from. Danny Merritt came to us through a mutual friend, Chris Harris, who was on the show for a while, co-hosting with us. And Danny and Chris go way back. They both grew up in the Cleveland area. Danny, I'm like, when I spoke to Danny, I spoke very carefully. Danny was a very powerful woman. In just meeting her through this format, through Zoom. I don't want to use intimidated in the wrong sense, because she wasn't threatening or anything in that sense, but you could sense her power and her presence. And it was, I don't know. It was consuming. It was consuming. I could have probably talked to Danny for easily 4 or 5 hours. I could tell I was maybe pushing the end of her patience, but I've never gotten to talk to someone who built a clothing company from the ground up.
She was amazing. I wasn't there for the episode, right? Like sometimes they just work out that way, if you notice. But it's really one of the coolest parts of like somebody taking a chance to open up with us on the show. And I think, well, you ended up with some gear. What's her brand? We should shout out her brand. Illusion Clothing. Illusion Clothing. Such a beautiful brand and like a really, really beautiful person. Even Whaler agrees. So
beyond the aesthetic, what they're doing, you know, it's one of those brands that you can really get behind. You can really support. You can feel really good about supporting, because what they're doing is so much more than making men look good. You know, I'll be honest. She designs for the confident man. And guess what? If you ain't confident, the right clothes can make you a little bit more confident. In this clip, Danny introduces us to, she takes us way back. She basically gives us her origin story. And it's really powerful. It's Marvel-esque. And I encourage all of you to check this episode out, get to know Danny. If that's a little too personal for you, that's a little too personal for you, get to know Illusion Clothing.
Yeah.
Check it out.
Yeah. It's a cool brand. She tells us here how she got into it.
So when I went to college, I just went, I wanted to follow something that was on something that I loved. And I liked computer engineering at that time. So, I just wanted to go into that field. But, I remember sitting in those classes saying, I know that this isn't what I want to do long term. So I just pulled out, especially when you're spending your own money. And that's something I didn't find out until I was in school. I'm like, wait a minute, this is my money?
Oh, no. They drop that invoice on you way before you get any kind of diploma, any kind of knowledge, anything. Like, you're just like, I haven't even put curtains up yet, and I'm already getting bills from the university.
I started doing the math, and I'm like, wait a minute. So 4 years in, I'll be this much in debt? I said, absolutely not. I had to drop out immediately because not only was I going to do something that I didn't want to do, I'd be in debt, a whole lot of debt. You know what I mean? So I didn't want to have that already down mentality, coming out of college had I went 4 years, owing money already, coming from a dysfunctional home. I just didn't want that on my back. So I left.
Is this a generational thing? Like, because we all feel that. All I take from what you just said is like, why the hell aren't we telling kids in high school? Like, college, I'm not saying we're not anti-education, but you don't have to do it right away. University is not the only route. And I hate to say it, but college, university, whatever your setting is, it's not the best place to find that's an expensive ass way to find out what you want to do in life. Right? Like, if anything, it's full of pitfalls and mistakes. And yep, I stepped in every pothole and now I figured it out. Like, by that time, like you said, you're beaten down. You're not broke because you never had any money, but you're going to be broke.
I mean, it's not a good way to start.
You're going to be broke.
You know what I mean? Like, it's not a good way to start. And I had learned the credit card system in college as well. And I took that and raked up thousands of dollars. I said I had to get out of it. I don't know what snapped in me, but I just didn't want that much debt on my back, at 19 years old, 18 and 19. It's just too young, So I paid my way through junior college.
Hey, most interruptions and most podcasts are to tell you to do something. One of the things I want to do is just thank you for listening. We really appreciate each and every one of the downloads, and we work really hard to bring this show and find guests and experts who can validate what they're talking about. Keep listening. Thanks again, and stay safe.
Do you have a moment like that you can literally recall, whether it was in class, in the dorm room, like that? I don't know about aha, but just or was it a fuck it type moment? Excuse my language, but was it more of I'm done with this because I'm excited about that? Or was it like, I'm just done with this. This is a dead end.
I was in class one day and the teacher was lecturing. I also had a problem with that too. Toledo's a pretty big school and you're not a name, you're an ID number. And I didn't feel a relationship with the professor. So for me, it was kind of easy to just detach. Not to mention all the parties I was going to. I mean, I was partying on a weeknight and then turning around and running the class. So for me, it was just, I think when you come from an abusive household and you go into that, it's very dangerous. You know what I mean? You could really, lose everything in that. And I felt myself going that way. So
you completely lose yourself in this new environment that'll fill you up with all sorts of other stuff, right? And you're 18 years old,
My roommate was 22, so she could drink. And
oh man, that would have. I probably wouldn't have made it through a year if I was in that environment that you're describing.
Drinking, she knew everybody on campus. We get in every party. It was just too much. It was too much. Way too much.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Wow. So you drop out.
Yeah.
What happens next?
I got a job at a barbecue chicken shack. That sounds crazy, but I got a job at a local barbecue joint. And I just started working and got me a car and met my husband. We moved in together real fast because he also came from an abusive situation. So within a matter of 7 or 8 months, we were living together already. And then my brother, who was also dealing with abuse, we had to get him out of his situation. So he lived with us. So it was, I instantly became almost like a mom because we had to take him to school. And, it's just it was crazy.
And we're talking within 12 months. 12 months earlier, you were in a dorm with a 22-year-old and we're just partying every night. I mean, real life came at you. I mean, your whole life sounds like unfortunately real. But like, dude, you went from being a college student to like, yeah, you worked at a chicken shack. You had rent to pay. Like, I mean, that's...
Yeah, especially because when I came home, my mother said, well, you can't stay here. It was kind of like that mentality. Like, well, since you won't be the golden child that I want you to be or I envision, then you're just cut off. You know, I've learned now that my mom's a narcissist, but I didn't know what that was then. So the love was never there. It was just be what I want you to be or be nothing. So I chose to be nothing and went ahead with, you know, navigating life on my own, figuring it out. So.
It's really tough to meet somebody else's expectations. Doesn't matter who that person is, how much they love you.
Sorry about that.
So I decided to be the nothing. So now I want to get into your husband. First off, I will say, sounds like, and I don't know anything about him, but just the way you speak about him, like, you guys seem like a really wonderful couple. He sounds like a real strong presence in your life, and I'm sure if he were here, he'd be talking mostly about you. So it's always nice to see that come through sincerely. All right, so you're what, like, I don't know. I'm thinking early 20s. Let's start getting into when you were like, I think other people will like my shit too. It doesn't sound like you ever were completely void of confidence, but there's a big difference from like maybe giving stuff away or like having people try stuff to like, when did you make that decision to like, I want to do this as a business? Like, this is how I want to start putting food on the table.
I think when I got pregnant in 2006, I knew I had to make a decision then. Like, okay, you're either going to take this serious all the way or you're going to work, because I'm not going to bring a life into the world and not, you know, be able to take care of them. So in 2006, that's when I really got serious. And, you know, people liked it immediately. But we started finally, you know, establishing the business around 06. Yep, when I was pregnant.
Yeah.